It seems like everyone is yelling about democracy. We need to save democracy! Democracy is on the ballot! This election is between democracy and authoritarianism. Here's the response I have. To hell with our democracy. And before you clutch those pearls, let me explain. I'm not talking about democracy. I'm talking about the over-idealized and old as shit American democracy.
Despite all the lofty rhetoric of democracy, when our political institutions were set up in the 1780s, they actually were set up to benefit in large part a propertied white male minority, a very affluent white male minority, many of whom were slaveholders. And in fact, the public were largely excluded from choosing the country's leaders. And far from encouraging majority rule, the founding institutions of our country facilitated minority rule instead.
Minority rule. Now that is American democracy.
So many of our institutions are being controlled by this shrinking and radical conservative white minority that's opposed by a majority of Americans, but has taken power by taking advantage of the anti-democratic institutions of American politics and then using new anti-democratic tactics like voter suppression, election subversion, gerrymandering, the censoring of history to make sure that their rule is indefinite.
That's Ari Berman, an expert who wrote the book on minority rule called Minority Rule. And it's this ploy still in place that is this ticking time bomb threatening to explode into something far more sinister for the future of our country.
The founding fathers wanted to create a political system that benefited people like themselves.
Intentionally built from the start, American democracy was never supposed to be for the people.
Affluent white male property owners, many of whom owned slaves, most of whom owned a lot of land, they wanted to protect themselves from the masses. They viewed the public as something to be feared, and they viewed popular majorities as something to be constrained rather than encouraged. And I think that remains the central flaw of American democracy, that the U.S. Constitution itself was set up as something that was meant to constrain democracy rather than encourage democracy. And that legacy is still with us today.
It's almost as if the founding fathers were a little scared of some revolution.
The fascinating thing about how the different branches of government were set up was that they were designed to prevent the public from having a major role in selecting the government's leaders.
Yet, despite some modifications and some reforms, pretty much all of the undemocratic features still stick with us today. And that means that all of these protections for white wealthy people, they remain central to all of our institutions.
Our basic governing institutions, how we elect our president, how we choose our members of Congress, how we select our Supreme Court justices, actually aren't very democratic at all.
Let's go down the line here. The executive branch.
Only 3 times before the 2000 election had the loser of the popular vote won the Electoral College. But it happened twice in the last 16 years. In 2000...
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd president of the United States.
In 2016...
Last night, I congratulated Donald Trump and offered to work with him on behalf of our country.
It almost happened again in 2020.
The Electoral College versus the popular vote is just one part of what originated with the Founding Fathers to ensure that a conservative and white minority could stay in power even if a majority disagrees.
We have to stand against the tyranny of the mob. And the Founding Fathers understood that you have decentralized elections through the Electoral College and having states' rights. The Electoral College is brilliant. The Electoral College has worked. It's one of the greatest firewalls against tyranny.
Which brings us to the next branch, legislative.
The level of inequality in the Senate today would have shocked James Madison. So one of the things that happened when there was these debates over the Senate was that each state was given the same number of senators, which a lot of senators spoke out against about the time and warned that would lead to minority rule.
Now, to put it in some perspective, the first census was taken in 1790, and it named Virginia as the largest state in the country with a population of approximately 747,000, which at the time was 12 times as many people as the smallest state, Delaware. Now, 200 plus years later, The 2020 census confirmed California is the new largest state in the country, with a population of 39.3 million people. That's 68 times the population of Wyoming, the country's now smallest state. And so because of how the Senate is set up, and because it hasn't been truly reformed since its inception, over time it's become biased towards those smaller, conservative, and whiter states. And all of this leads us to the last branch, judicial.
The undemocratic features of the presidency and of the Senate have led to an unprecedented situation at the Supreme Court, where for the first time in U.S. history, 5 of 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court have been nominated by Republican presidents who initially lost the popular vote and confirmed by senators representing a minority of Americans.
So over and over and over again, the Supreme Court has created these situations where it's protected the rights of powerful white people while undermining the rights of everyone else.
That's a fascinating and very scary situation where a Supreme Court that is a product of minority rule has then issued radical decisions on topics like abortion and gun control and voting rights that are opposed by a majority of Americans.
For example, overturning Roe v. Wade with Dobbs, or gutting the Voting Rights Act with Shelby County v. Holder, and of course letting billionaires essentially buy our elections with Citizens United.
I think we're at a situation today where the Supreme Court is a legacy of the anti-democratic distortions in American politics. That court has turned around and made America less democratic as a result of its decisions.
If there's anything all these years of all of these SCOTUS decisions have taught us, it really should be that.
There's been this struggle throughout American history between white supremacy and multiracial democracy, and that fight has reached a fever pitch today.
Like all things Republican now, the road leads back to Trump. Because for the first time in US history, white people are going to be the minority in this country. And for a lot of conservatives and pretty much all of the Republican Party, that idea has them running scared.
So there's these biases that are built into the Constitution, and the biases over and over are in favor of more conservative areas, whiter areas, more rural areas. That's the same constituency that likes Donald Trump. There's this overrepresentation of Trump voters in the political system at the expense of voters who oppose Trump, which over and over and over have shown to be a majority of Americans.
That's why they've been scheming and working for all of these years to strengthen their grip on this country through minority rule.
This shrinking conservative white minority is exploiting the undemocratic features of American politics while doubling down on a whole wide new range of anti-democratic tactics like voter suppression, election subversion, gerrymandering, the censoring of history to try to entrench their power. What they're really doing is retreating behind a fortress to stop what they view as the coming siege.
And while yes, Trump is definitely accelerating all of these anti-democratic ideas, he's also kind of the perfect product of an American democracy. Because our system is so anti-democratic, it's so easily captured and diverted seamlessly into authoritarianism.
Preserving the rights and freedoms we have today, which is what Joe Biden is largely campaigning on.
Democracy, American democracy. That's what the 2024 election is all about. We have to prove that our model isn't a relic of history.
It's not enough. It's incredibly important, but it's not enough. We have to reform the system that created Trump in the first place. Otherwise, we have these ticking time bombs that are built into American politics.
That bomb may or may not explode this year, as it almost did on January 6th, 2021.
It's just a matter of time before the anti-democratic aspects of American politics get so bad that they're just somehow untenable. And I think that's the real risk here, is that our political system itself is a gateway in many ways to autocracy, to authoritarianism, to minority rule. And that the Constitution, far from protecting against a lot of those things, actually facilitates those kind of things.
Ari Berman's book, Minority Rule, The Right-Wing Attack on the Will of the People and the Fight to Resist It, and it's out in bookstores and online April 23rd. But you can catch an exclusive excerpt of the book right now at motherjones.com. Now this is kind of silly, but I kept coming back to this as I was writing this, putting this all together, talking to Ari. I have this sticker on my water bottle, and it always strikes up an intriguing conversation. I have it right here. It reads, "I don't care what the founding fathers wanted.